The question is, what exactly was paradise? When Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Where is paradise? What does the scripture mean about he descended into hell as the Apostles' Creed? I think it's the Apostles' Creed. There's other creeds, that Athanasian Creed and stuff. I think it's Apostles. And what else did he do? What is this about, what the scripture says about him preaching to the souls in hell? That whole thing is all related. All right. So first we're going to, let me see if I can, I'm going to get rid of some of these tabs so I don't get mixed up here. And we're going to show this link. And let me post that, because I'm pretty sure Chow didn't have time to get it. Didn't know I was going to do this. This is the word paradise. It's a transliteration. This reads in Greek, paradisos. Okay, you can see it in English letters there. So that's a transliteration, because if it was a translation, you would say, a beautiful place or something like that. But we take the word paradise as an anglicized pronunciation of the Greek word paradisos. Okay, so what does it mean? The literal meaning: among the Persians, a grand enclosure or preserve, hunting ground, park, shady and well watered, in which wild animals were kept for the hunt, was enclosed by walls and furnished with towers for the hunters. So a garden, a pleasure ground, a grove, a park. Then meaning 3, that's the literal meanings, okay, 1 and 2. The third meaning is figurative: the part of Hades which was thought by the later Jews to be the abode of the souls of the pious, I should say, until the resurrection, but some understand this to be a heavenly paradise. So there's some disagreement as to whether this was in the earth or not. I think biblically it is not heaven. We can rule that out. As number 4, we can rule out that it might be loosely applied to heaven, but I think that's not precise enough, not as precise as the scriptures are. So, we have some more insight into what is meant in Jesus' account of the rich man and Lazarus, and that is Luke 16:19-31. Let me go here to my search thingy, where we get the verses up, and it says, "There was a certain rich person dressed in purple and fine linen, lived each day in happiness and luxury, but also a destitute man named Lazarus," not the one who died and Jesus raised up, right? This is a different one. "A poor beggar, put at the rich man's door, covered with ulcers, longed to fill himself with crumbs from the rich man's table. Eventually the destitute man died, and he was carried away by the angels to the place of honor with Abraham." The place of honor. This is in the older versions called Abraham's bosom, which sounds funny to us today, but the place of honor is what it means. Next to him, it's like at the Last Supper when the Apostle John was asked, Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus what he meant by someone would betray them, and he leaned against his chest. So they're reclining at the table, and he leans over. So that's what they're saying, he was sitting in the place of honor. Okay? So, in this context, Jesus is saying that these rich and poor men in this account, which I don't believe is a parable because Jesus didn't name names in parables, he's saying that the place of honor was with Abraham among the dead. So Abraham is in this place. And by implication, all the righteous dead to that point. Then the rich man also died and was buried. The rich man being tormented in Hades. And, that's what the Greek says, tormented in Hades. Now, Hades is a Greek word that means the unseen, and the literal meaning. And it referred to the abode of the dead, which in the ancient Near East belief is my understanding that they believe that this place had 2 sections, one for good people and one for bad people. The good side came to be called paradise, and the bad, torments. So the rich man is in torments. He looked up and saw Abraham a great distance away. So you could see across these 2 sections. And you could talk to people across the wide gulf between them, but you couldn't cross yourself over. With Lazarus at the place of honor. And he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me. Send Lazarus to dip his fingertip in water and cool my tongue, for I am suffering in this inferno. This is where we get the fires of hell, not just the lake of fire, but also in torments. Apparently a hot place. Suffering in this inferno. And notice that even in death, the rich man considers Lazarus a nobody who should be sent on an errand for him. Send Lazarus to dip his finger. Excuse me. But Abraham replied, Child, that's the word in the Greek, remember that you received good things in your life, while Lazarus only received bad things. Now he's being comforted and you are suffering. We would need to remember this the next time we grouse about how good the evil have it in this life. And besides, there's a wide chasm set between us so that no one can cross over from one side to the other. Then I beg you, Father, he replied, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, and he could warn them not to come to this place of torment. It's the only non-selfish thing this guy probably ever did. But Abraham said to him, they have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to them. That is to say, they got the Bible, why don't they read it? Oh no, Father Abraham, he replied, but if someone were to come to them from the dead, they would turn to God. If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, said Abraham, they won't be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead. And of course, this has deep meaning also, that Jesus would rise from the dead and people still wouldn't believe it. People won't believe it even if they see someone rise from the dead, and the hostile witnesses also know that he rose, because they paid off the Roman guards to say that his disciples stole his body. So, that's the account of the rich man and Lazarus. So, Hades, the unseen, is the Greek word, the equivalent of the Hebrew word Sheol. And in my opinion, the scripture and ancient Near East thought is telling me Sheol, the grave, Hades, was divided between paradise and torments, per this account of the rich man and Lazarus, where you could communicate, but you can't cross over, and you can't get out, right? Okay, so what else? We got other scriptures to, of course, complicate some things for us. So we're going to look at 2 passages here. Let me scroll up and get those. Well, that one was spaced over weird. But it says in Ephesians 4:7-9, each of us was given favor or grace in accordance with how the Anointed One has appointed each gift. What does it mean? Ascending to the heights, he captured captivity and gave gifts to people. Well, in order to ascend, it means he first descended into the lower parts of the earth. We're just going to read these for right now. Notice also, 1 Peter 3:18, notice also that the Anointed One suffered for sins, the righteous for the sake of the unrighteous, that he may lead you to God. When he was put to death in the flesh, but alive in the spirit, he also went to the spirits in prison and made announcement to the ones who were hostile to the faith from the time of Noah. God patiently awaited the construction of the ark, inside of which only a mere 8 souls were brought safely out of the water. There's a lot in those passages. The first point I want to make about that is that Jesus went to paradise, or the first theory, I should say, that Jesus went to paradise and spoke to the people in torments the way Abraham spoke to the rich man, but it doesn't explain why he would only speak to those who died in the flood. So there's a major question with that interpretation, that somehow this passage, which is really not talking about the crucifixion, although you would, boy, I'm missing a space here, I'll have to remember that, put to death in the flesh but alive in the spirit. He also, whether this continues or not is a question, but went to the spirits in prison and announced to them. The word in the older versions is preached, and people think, oh, preach the gospel, offered them salvation. But why would he only offer it to, at first it doesn't mean that, and second, why would he only offer it to the people who died in the flood? There were other people before the flood who died, and people after the flood who died. Why wouldn't he preach to them too and give them a second chance? Why would it only be people in the flood? So there's a lot of questions with this interpretation. The other way to look at it is that it's about Jesus speaking through Noah before the flood. So let me get you an article that explains that fairly well, I think. I'm going to blow that up a bit. Christian Courier, Wayne Jackson. I like a lot of his stuff. I don't agree with everything he says, but a lot of times I think he makes a good point. And here again we have the passage in 1 Peter 3. The difficult passage begins by affirming that Christ died in order to provide the benefits of salvation to unrighteous people. The apostle states that the Lord was put to death in the flesh, his crucifixion, but that he was made alive in the spirit. What's the meaning of the latter expression? It could mean that his spirit continued to be vitalized with life even after the death of his body. Well, duh. Or else it may indicate that Jesus was made alive again when his spirit re-entered his body at the time of his reincarnation. Wow, I did not mean to say that. Resurrection. He did not reincarnate. He incarnated once, but he got a new body when he raised again, which is why I despise the ignorance of people who say, zombie Jesus. He did not rise in rotting flesh. That's just being deliberately ignorant, stupid, and antagonistic. So, re-entered his body at the time of his resurrection from the dead, according to, they say, reference Romans 1:4, 1 Timothy 3:16. The apostle then says, in which, that is to say, in his spirit, Christ went and preached to the spirits in prison that were disobedient in the days of Noah. Some believe this passage teaches that during the 3 days his body was in the tomb, Jesus went into the spirit world of the imprisoned lost. Why only the ones in the flood, though? At that time, according to this theory, the Lord preached the gospel to those who died during the time of Noah's flood. Again, why only them? And who says he preached the gospel? But this is what some people believe. The passage simply cannot mean this, and for the following reasons. The Bible clearly teaches that following death there comes a judgment, Hebrews 9:27. After one leaves this earth, there is no plan of salvation for that person. The spiritual condition in which a person dies, prepared or unprepared, is that which he will possess at the time of the general resurrection, referenced Matthew 25:1-12. There will be a resurrection of the unrighteous dead as well to face judgment for the things they did. There's absolutely no evidence that there's a second chance for redemption following death. The Universalists say otherwise, but they're wrong. According to Christ's instruction in the narrative regarding the rich man and Lazarus, within the spirit world called Hades, in the American Standard Version, there is a great gulf fixed or immovable, not able to be changed ever, between the place where evil people abide and where good people are. The verb fixed in the Greek New Testament is a perfect tense form, suggesting that the gulf is forever fixed. There is no moving this thing ever. There can never be any crossing. As A.T. Robertson called it, a permanent chasm. Bruce said the location is fixed and final. It would thus hardly have accomplished anything for the Lord to have preached to those in a state of punishment, tantalizing them with the hope of salvation when they had no chance of entering paradise. This is something I could see Calvinists teaching, because they believe that God basically mocks people that he had not chosen for salvation by offering them the gospel and telling us to offer the gospel to everyone, knowing that the vast majority could never ever accept it because they're simply incapable, and yet God holds them account. That's Calvinist twisted theology. But God is not the kind of God who would do this sort of thing, such as tantalizing the people who died in the flood with the hope of salvation. He wouldn't do that. So what does it mean? The passage affirms that Jesus Christ, in his spirit, not in the flesh, during the days of Noah, proclaimed God's truth to the evil pre-flood generation before they died, right? You can do that then. How did the Lord do that? He was operating through Noah, a preacher of righteousness, according to 2 Peter 2:5. Observe that in the same letter, Peter stated that the Spirit of Christ was in the Old Testament prophets, the Spirit of Christ, as they declared heaven's message. Okay, in the same letter in 1 Peter 1:11. This is a key verse explaining 1 Peter 3:18. When Christ through Noah preached to those evil people, they were alive on the earth. But at the time Peter wrote his letter, they had long been dead. And this is what messes us up a lot of time in interpretation if people are sloppy, that when something's written has a bearing on how they're going to express themselves grammatically. So at the time Peter wrote this letter, they had been long dead, and their spirits were suffering in the prison of hell known as, they say, Tartarus, and this is where I disagree with them here. Because, well, why don't we go look at 2 Peter 2:4. I don't want to use that because I have a thing I need to correct. 2 Peter 2:4. So let's go and get that. Again, don't pay any attention to those crypto ads on my browser. 2 Peter 2. We'll look at verse 4. God didn't spare the angels when they sinned, cast them into the lowest level of the underworld and Tartarus, and committed them to chains of darkness, keeping them there until the day of judgment. It says angels went there. I don't know why someone of Wayne Jackson's caliber would say that the human spirits were there. It doesn't say that in 2 Peter 2:4. In order to help clarify the meaning of this difficult verse, we might suggest the following paraphrase. Christ was made alive in the Spirit, in which during, like a parenthesis here, in which during the days of Noah he preached to evil people whose spirits are now in the prison, those who died in the flood. I still don't believe that it's Tartarus. So this is kind of a parenthesis. Christ was made alive in the Spirit, and that Spirit is who went through Noah to preach to people before the flood. This type of language reflects a common figure of speech found in the Bible. It's known as prolepsis. It involves bringing two time frames together into one expression. Here's a more current example. If one were to say President Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky, he would be combining two time eras into one sentence. When he was born, Lincoln was not president, but he later became such. However, by this common mode of expression, one associates a current fact with an antecedent event. So we use this expression all the time. We understand, because of our common context, that when we say President Abraham Lincoln, we're not talking about the current president, right? And he was born in Kentucky. Anyone who wasn't familiar with this, or maybe someone 1,000 years from now, might look at this sentence and go, wait a minute. He wasn't president when this was written, yet he was born in Kentucky. We know he was born, but he wasn't president then. You see how people can get messed up if they try to dig into the grammar and expressions without knowing figures of speech, with just surface skimming. Surface skimming will almost always lead you astray. And many cults and schisms have happened because of surface skimming and not knowing the entire context. So it was with reference to 1 Peter 3:18. The preaching was done by Christ through Noah in ancient times. The spirits are currently in a place of confinement. There's a very reasonable interpretation of this verse, and it conforms to what we know of the state of the dead as elsewhere described in the Bible. No meaning can be imposed upon a difficult text which makes it conflict with other clear passages. So we know from what, the argument being made here, the most plausible meaning, in my opinion, when it talks about, in 1 Peter 3:18 to 20, about Jesus preaching to the souls who died in the flood, we can rule out that he did this during his 3 days of being dead, because it says that he only preached to the people who died in the flood, which doesn't make sense if he was preaching to all the dead before he himself died. Sorry, 3 cuckoos for that. And the fact that we have other statements that we would not have a problem with in modern English that help explain that this sort of thing was also used in ancient Greek, where we're talking about a past event as a kind of parenthesis in something else. Another point we're making in that particular context of 1 Peter. So hopefully we've figured out what Jesus was up to during those 3 days. And it also, the one night I think I left out, for some reason I didn't write it down. John 20:17. So let's go look at John 20. And down to verse 17, where Jesus is arisen and he's talking to Mary, who doesn't recognize him right away. Then when he finally says her name, she turned and said to him, Rabboni, which means teacher in Aramaic. Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father." Okay, so Jesus has been dead for 3 days, but he hasn't yet gone to heaven. So what was he doing? I think there's another scripture that I don't think I wrote down this time. I don't think I have it anywhere in my notes, where it says that he made, I think it's in Hebrews, where he brought his blood to the altar in heaven. Let me see if I can find it that way. Well, let's go to the New Testament, shall we? I thought it was in Hebrews. Let me try, let's see, an altar. Because I think this is one of the things he was, after when he ascended, he had to do that before he could take captivity captive. Remember that? I didn't say fire. These search engines, I don't know. Hebrews 9:12. That's the one I was looking for. No, I don't want cookies. So we're going to go somewhere else and look for Hebrews 9:12. Let's go over here. Let's see, Hebrews 9. Cookies do sound good right now, but anyway, let's see. It was not the blood of goats and calves, but his very own blood that he carried into the holiest place once for all eternity, obtaining our redemption. He obviously didn't do that in the earthly temple. So, the reason he didn't want Mary to hang on to him is because he hadn't yet brought his sacrifice to the temple in heaven. Once for all, that means you can't keep re-sacrificing him even as a symbol. And so, before, in those 3 days, he hadn't been to heaven. I think, have figured out that the part about preaching to the souls who died in the flood didn't happen at that time. So what was he doing? Well, Abraham was sitting there in paradise. So was the poor beggar Lazarus and all the other righteous dead. He probably was there. And then when he left, he took his sacrifice to heaven and he emptied paradise and took all the righteous dead to heaven, so that after all this, the Apostle Paul could say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And there is no mention of just going to paradise as far as I know. Let's do a quick search. Let me go back to this one because their search is better than mine. If they use the word paradise or not. Yes, they do. Before the cross is these two. Okay. Yeah, we do have one, because I was thinking, as I said that, I wasn't sure. 2 Corinthians 12, 3-4. I know this man was caught up to paradise, and he's talking about himself, the Apostle Paul, and that he heard unspeakable words that we're not allowed to repeat, which is why I say that anyone today who thinks they repeatedly go to heaven and come back, and Jesus gives them guided tours, that somehow, they were allowed to talk about it, but the Apostle Paul wasn't. And the only other person who went to heaven and came back was the Apostle John. And he was told to tell about it, and that's how we got Revelation. But the idea is that paradise was taken to heaven. Paradise meaning the people in paradise taken to heaven. That's how I understand it. Okay, question in the chat, but when, let's see. Okay, yeah, you got it. That was the same passage, right, in, or was it? Oh, I had that one up. That was the one in Hebrews, wasn't it? I don't know where I left it, but yeah, Hebrews 9:12. So, yeah, the temple not built with hands. Yep, right up there in verse 11. So, 11 and 12, Hebrews 9, 11 and 12. Tells us that he took his blood to the heavenly temple to make sacrifice, and then he could take the captives in paradise up to heaven, and that's why paradise is now, from that point, equated with heaven, because it was taken there. So, I don't know, I hope that answers questions that were put to me also this morning on what was the thief on the cross talking about, or what did Jesus say to him about today you'll be with me in paradise. Where was he for those 3 days? What did he do? Why did he tell Mary not to hang on to him at that point when he ascended? And I think we pretty well covered, the belief that that Hades was between paradise and torment, and then after the cross, after Jesus completed all the things he had to do, then he took the people in paradise up to heaven.